The Galactic Empire ruled with an iron fist, its dominions spanning countless systems. Entire civilizations knelt before them, not through admiration but sheer terror. Their methodology was simple: identify a rebellious world, send one of their legendary warlords, and crush all hope. These warlords were icons of fear, colossal beings with impenetrable armor, devastating weapons, and reputation steeped in bloodshed. Resistance was a concept alien to them, submission was all they knew. For centuries, the Empire's gaze had avoided Earth. A small, unremarkable planet on the fringes of a lesser star system, it was beneath their notice. But as their empire grew, so too did their hunger. Earth, they realized, was not just a quaint anomaly. It was a strategic gem. Its resources, its location, and its peculiar biological adaptability made it valuable. Still, they did not see humanity as a threat. In their vast catalogue of conquered species, humans ranked as primitive, a stubborn, chaotic people who lacked unity or discipline. A nuisance at best, an afterthought at worst. When the Empire's scout ships arrived, they expected the usual: a short campaign, a token resistance, and an eventual surrender. What they encountered instead was defiance. Humanity, fractured though it was, united against the invaders with a ferocity that caught even the Empire off guard. Earth's defenses were primitive by galactic standards, its fleets made up of outdated spacecraft and crude weaponry. But humans had something the Empire couldn't quantify: an unrelenting will to fight. The first skirmishes were costly for both sides. Imperial forces were frustrated, not because of Earth's technological prowess, but because of its tenacity. Cities fell, only for guerrilla fighters to rise in the ruins. Military leaders who should have surrendered chose to sacrifice themselves instead, inspiring others to take their place. It wasn't enough to win the war, but it was enough to get the Empire's attention. The Emperor, displeased with the delay, issued an order that sent chills through the Imperial ranks. Zorgar would be dispatched to Earth. The name alone carried weight: Zorgar, the breaker of moons, the shadow of conquest. His arrival marked the end of rebellion. On a dozen worlds, his presence had extinguished hope. To him, Earth was just another backwater to subdue, another notch on his already formidable legacy. Word of Zorgar's impending arrival spread quickly. On Earth, despair threatened to take root. Humanity's armies were already strained, its leaders running out of options. Capitulation seemed inevitable. But even as the world teetered on the brink, a different kind of plan emerged, one born not of desperation, but of belief in a single man. He wasn't a general, nor a soldier in any official capacity. To some, he was a relic of a bygone era. But to those who knew him, he was a legend. They called him the Gunslinger. His name was spoken in whispers, his deeds veiled in myth. A wanderer, a protector, and above all, a man who never walked away from a fight he believed in. The decision to send him wasn't unanimous. Many in Earth's leadership thought it was madness. But those who understood him knew the truth: Zorgar wasn't just an opponent. He was a symbol. And only another symbol could stand against him. When the Gunslinger agreed, he did so without fanfare. There was no speech, no theatrics. He simply loaded his weapon, a revolver unlike any the Empire had ever seen, and set off. His approach was as unconventional as the choice to send him. He carried no army, no fleet, no technological marvels. Just himself and the weight of Earth's defiance. The Empire scoffed. Zorgar, amused by the audacity, prepared to make an example of this so-called emissary. But beneath his contempt, there was curiosity. The Gunslinger was not like the others. There was something in his stance, his calm demeanor, that unsettled even the warlord. It wasn't arrogance or bravado, it was certainty, a quiet confidence that spoke of untold stories and impossible victories. As he stood before the might of the Empire, the Gunslinger offered no explanations. He made no demands. But in his silence, he carried the weight of 1,000 years of human history, a history filled with individuals who defied impossible odds. The Empire saw Earth as a scattered, disorganized world. They had no frame of reference for the kind of hero Earth had sent. The Gunslinger wasn't just one man. He was a manifestation of humanity's stubbornness, its ingenuity, its refusal to bow. In his eyes there was a promise, a warning that Earth was not like the others, and that even in the face of overwhelming power, there were still battles the Empire wasn't prepared to fight. The battlefield was silent, an eerie stillness settling over the barren terrain. The Empire's troops, rows upon rows of alien soldiers clad in gleaming armor, stood at attention. Above them, the blackened sky was alive with the hum of warships, their massive shadows casting an oppressive pall over the ground. This was no mere show of force, it was an empire's might, a display of absolute dominance. And yet, standing alone at the edge of the field, was a single figure. He moved with deliberate calm, his boots crunching against the scorched earth. Clad in a patch duster that fluttered faintly in the wind, his silhouette was an anachronism. A wide-brimmed hat shaded his face, though not enough to conceal the sharp, steely gaze beneath. His revolver hung low on his hip, its polished surface catching the dim light. It was old-fashioned by every standard of the galaxy, a relic that had no place in this era of energy weapons and plasma cannons. Yet something about him, made even the most seasoned of Zorgar's soldiers hesitate. The murmur started, a ripple of unease spreading through the Imperial ranks. They had expected an army, a fleet, or at least a delegation of Earth's best and brightest. Instead, they got this, one man, unarmored, unaccompanied, and seemingly unbothered by the overwhelming odds stacked against him. Zorgar watched from his elevated position, perched atop a massive hover platform flanked by his elite guards. His crimson armor glinted with an unsettling menace, the intricate carvings on its surface a testament to his countless victories. At first, he merely stared at the approaching figure, his expression unreadable. But then a slow, guttural laugh escaped him, reverberating across the battlefield like distant thunder. "So," he boomed, his voice amplified by unseen technology. "This is humanity's champion? A relic of a primitive world? Tell me, human, do your people send jesters to entertain their conquerors?" The gunslinger stopped a dozen paces from the nearest soldier. He didn't flinch at Zorgar's words, didn't so much as glance at the hulking troops towering over him. Instead, he reached into his coat, pulled out a cigarette, and lit it with a flick of his thumb. The gesture, casual to the point of insolence, drew an audible snarl from one of the guards. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but carried an edge that cut through the air like a blade. "Didn't come here to entertain. Came to deliver a message." Zorgar leaned forward, his amusement tempered by curiosity. "A message? From your leaders? Let me guess, surrender. Mercy. The usual pitiful requests." The gunslinger exhaled a plume of smoke, his eyes fixed on the warlord. "Not exactly. Message is this: you don't belong here. And if you think Earth's just gonna roll over for you, you've got another thing coming. The simplicity of the statement caught Zorgar off guard. For a moment, the warlord simply stared, as if trying to decide whether to laugh or crush the insolent human where he stood. He chose the former, though his laugh was shorter this time, tinged with impatience. "Arrogance," Zorgar said, rising to his full height. "A trait your kind clings to like a drowning man to driftwood. But I have crushed entire civilizations more advanced than yours. What hope do you have, armed with your toys and your words?" The gunslinger tilted his head slightly, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of his revolver. "Sometimes a toy's all you need. If you know how to use it." The subtle challenge in his tone wasn't lost on Zorgar, whose expression darkened. He raised a hand, and a single soldier, a towering brute armed with a plasma halberd, stepped forward. "Prove it," Zorgar said. "Let us see if your primitive weapon can do more than gather dust." The soldier advanced, his weapon humming with lethal energy. The gunslinger didn't move. His hand remained at his side, his eyes locked on his opponent. The alien charged, raising the halberd for a devastating strike, and then it happened. In a blur too fast for the watching soldiers to comprehend, the gunslinger drew and fired. The shot was impossibly precise, striking the alien's weapon at its power core. The halberd exploded in a burst of sparks, sending the soldier staggering backward. Before he could recover, a second shot rang out, the this one aimed at his leg. The massive warrior crumpled to the ground, groaning in pain but very much alive. The entire exchange lasted less than 3 seconds. The silence that followed was deafening. Every eye was on the gunslinger, who calmly holstered his weapon as if the act had required no effort. Zorgar's amusement was gone, replaced by something far colder. Impressive, the warlord admitted, though his tone was laced with disdain. But parlor tricks won't save your world. The gunslinger met his gaze, unflinching. Wasn't trying to save it. Just wanted you to know what you're dealing with. Zorgar stepped forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over the battlefield. Enough games. If you think yourself worthy, face me. Prove your kind's resolve, and die knowing you failed. The gunslinger's lips twitched, the closest thing to a smile he'd shown all day. Been looking forward to this. The two figures faced each other, the ground between them a no-man's land of cracked earth and ash. The air hung heavy, suffused with the tension of countless eyes watching. On one side stood Zorgar, towering and armored, a colossus exuding power with every movement. His crimson plating pulsed faintly, a testament to the alien technology woven into his being, strength enhancers, kinetic shields, and energy emitters that made him less a warrior and more a living weapon. Across from him, the gunslinger stood in stark contrast, small by comparison, his coat billowing faintly in the wind, a lone figure against insurmountable odds. Zorgar took a slow step forward, his boots leaving deep imprints in the soil. Do you feel it, human? He rumbled. The weight of inevitability? You stand before the might of the galaxy itself, armed with nothing but an outdated toy. Do you truly think you can win? The gunslinger didn't answer immediately. His eyes, sharp and calculating, never left Zorgar. Slowly he shifted his stance, his hand resting lightly on the grip of his revolver. A fight ain't about what you bring to it, he said, his voice calm and measured. It's about how you use what you've got. The warlord sneered and raised his weapon, a massive blade forged from plasma, its edges crackling with energy. He swung it through the air in a casual arc, the sheer force sending a gust of wind across the battlefield. I will crush you, he said, his voice dripping with certainty. And when I do, your people will know that resistance is futile. The gunslinger's hand tensed, but he didn't draw. Not yet. Talk's cheap, he said. Show me what you've got. Zorgar moved first, a blur of crimson and steel as he charged. His blade came down with the force of an avalanche, aimed to cleave the gunslinger in two. But the human wasn't there. In a movement so fluid it seemed almost lazy, the gunslinger sidestepped, the blade slamming into the ground and sending shards of rock flying. Before Zorgar could recover, the gunslinger drew and fired. The shot struck true, hitting Zorgar's armor at a critical joint. A normal bullet would have ricocheted harmlessly, but this wasn't a normal bullet. It was a creation born of Earth's ingenuity, a blend of kinetic energy and molecular destabilization. The impact caused a small explosion, forcing Zorgar to stagger backward. For the first time, the warlord's confidence faltered. What trickery is this? He demanded, his voice a mix of fury and confusion. The gunslinger didn't reply. He moved, circling Zorgar with a predator's precision. His revolver barked again and again, each shot aimed with surgical accuracy. One hit the energy nodes on Zorgar's gauntlet, disabling a shield generator. Another struck the servos in his leg, slowing his movements. Every shot was calculated, every action deliberate. It was a dance of precision against brute force. Zorgar roared in frustration, switching tactics. His gauntlet fired an energy blast, a searing beam that scorched the earth where the gunslinger had stood moments before. The human was relentless, weaving through the barrage with uncanny agility. Each time Zorgar struck out, he found only empty air or a counterattack that chipped away at his armor and his pride. The warlord adjusted, using his strength to disrupt the battlefield itself. He swung his blade horizontally, not aiming for the gunslinger but for the terrain around him. The ground erupted in a cloud of dust and debris, obscuring the human from view. Zorgar smiled, confident he'd gained the upper hand. You cannot hide forever, he growled. A single gunshot rang out, piercing the chaos. It struck Zorgar's shoulder, bypassing his remaining defenses and forcing him to drop his weapon. He spun toward the source of the shot, his vision clearing just in time to see the gunslinger emerging from the dust, his revolver aimed squarely at the warlord's head. "Guess that's the difference between us," the gunslinger said, his tone as steady as his hand. "You rely on power. I rely on what I know." Zorgar stared at him, breathing heavily. His armor was scorched and battered, his systems faltering. For a moment, it seemed he might lunge again, might try to reclaim the upper hand through sheer will. But he didn't. Slowly, he raised his hands, the universal gesture of surrender. The gunslinger lowered his weapon but didn't holster it. He stepped closer, his eyes locked on Zorgar's. "Tell your people," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "Earth doesn't bow. Not to you, not to anyone. You come back here, and we'll be ready. More ready than you can imagine." Zorgar's eyes burned with humiliation and fury, but he didn't speak. He simply nodded, a small, grudging acknowledgement of defeat. The gunslinger stepped back, finally holstering his revolver. He turned without another word, walking away as the battlefield erupted into murmurs and disbelief. Behind him, Zorgar stood motionless, his pride in tatters, his certainty shattered. The message was clear: Earth was not to be underestimated. And its champions, no matter how unconventional, were a force to be reckoned with. Zorgar's return to his fleet was a spectacle of shame. The warlord who had once struck fear into entire star systems now limped aboard his command ship, his crimson armor scorched and battered, his reputation in tatters. The gathered officers and soldiers dared not meet his gaze, their disbelief and confusion evident in the uneasy silence that followed him. He offered no explanation, no words of consolation, only the heavy presence of a defeated giant. Behind closed doors, the debriefing was brutal. His superiors demanded answers, their voices sharp and incredulous. How could a lone human, armed with what they deemed a primitive weapon, best the Empire's greatest warrior? Zorgar, though proud, recounted the events with an unsettling mix of anger and awe. He spoke of the gunslinger's precision, his cunning, and, most unsettling of all, the unyielding resolve in his eyes. "They're not like the others," Zorgar admitted at last, his voice low and strained. "They don't fight for survival alone. They fight because it's who they are. That man wasn't just a soldier. He was something else." The revelation spread quickly through the imperial hierarchy. At first, there was outrage. The notion that a backwater species could outwit their finest was unthinkable. But as the days passed, that outrage gave way to something far more dangerous: doubt. If Earth's primitive weapons and tactics could humble a warlord, what else might they be capable of? Could the Empire's approach, forged through centuries of brute conquest, be insufficient against such a species? Debates erupted in the Emperor's court. Some argued for immediate retaliation, a campaign to crush Earth before it could grow into a larger threat. Others urged caution, warning that underestimating humanity a second time might have graver consequences. Whispers of dissent began to ripple through the ranks, a rare and troubling phenomenon in the Empire's rigid structure. Meanwhile, on Earth, the gunslinger's actions ignited a movement. His duel with Zorgar became the stuff of legend, a modern-day David versus Goliath. News of his victory spread like wildfire, uniting a fractured planet in a way no political speech or treaty ever could. The gunslinger, ever elusive, refused interviews and accolades, but his absence only magnified his mystique. He became a symbol of resistance, a testament to humanity's ingenuity and grit. In schools, children learned his story alongside humanity's greatest historic victories. Artists depicted him in murals and sculptures, his lone figure standing tall against the Empire's overwhelming forces. Leaders invoked his name in speeches, rallying their people to prepare for the inevitable. For the first time in decades, nations set aside their differences to fortify their shared defenses. The message was clear: Earth would not be caught unprepared again. Beyond Earth, the ripple effects of the gunslinger's stand reached unexpected corners of the galaxy. Among the Empire's vassal states, whispers began to circulate of humanity's defiance. Species long subdued by fear and oppression took notice, their curiosity piqued by the rumors of a lone human who had humbled the invincible Zorgar. In darkened rooms and hidden enclaves, seeds of rebellion began to sprout. The Empire's intelligence network flagged these stirrings as anomalies at first, isolated and insignificant. But as the whispers grew louder, a troubling pattern emerged. Some species openly questioned the Empire's dominance, emboldened by Earth's example. Others began to probe their own histories, rediscovering tales of resistance and independence long buried under Imperial rule. In the Imperial court, the Emperor himself grew restless. The Gunslinger's actions were not merely an affront to his warlord but a challenge to the Empire's very foundation. The idea that one man could defy their might and live was a dangerous precedent. It had to be erased, and the memory of Earth's resistance crushed beneath the Empire's boot. Plans for a larger invasion began to take shape. Generals and strategists pored over data, analyzing Earth's strengths and weaknesses. This time, they vowed, there would be no mistakes. Yet, even as they plotted, a shadow of doubt lingered. For all their technological superiority, they could not quantify what made humanity so dangerous. The Gunslinger had revealed a truth they were unprepared to face: some battles could not be won by power alone. On Earth, the mood was both somber and resolute. The Gunslinger's victory, though celebrated, was understood to be only the beginning. Humanity had earned a brief reprieve, but the war was far from over. Scientists worked tirelessly to reverse engineer the Empire's technology, blending it with Earth's unique ingenuity. Soldiers trained harder, their resolve bolstered by the knowledge that they were fighting for something greater than themselves. The Gunslinger himself remained a mystery. Some said he had returned to the shadows, preparing for the next fight. Others believed he had become a myth, a symbol rather than a man. Wherever he was, his impact was undeniable. He had not only defended Earth but reshaped its future, uniting humanity under a shared purpose and reminding them of their greatest strength, their ability to rise against impossible odds. And so, as the Empire gathered its forces and Earth steeled itself for the inevitable, the galaxy watched. Some saw the Gunslinger as a spark of hope, a sign that even the mightiest could fall. Others saw him as a threat, a harbinger of chaos in a fragile order. But one thing was clear: humanity was no longer an afterthought. They had announced their presence on the galactic stage, not with a fleet or a treaty, but with a single shot. The story of the Gunslinger spread like wildfire, leaping from one star system to the next, carried on the lips of traitors, spies, and defectors. In the shadowed corners of the galaxy, among the oppressed and subjugated, it became more than a tale of defiance. It was a call to action. To species who had long endured the Empire's iron fist, Earth's victory was proof that even the smallest spark could ignite a rebellion. On distant worlds where hope had been little more than a whisper, resistance movements began to stir. The Gunslinger's name was whispered in alien tongues, a symbol of humanity's courage and ingenuity. Uprisings flared in places where the Empire's control had seemed unshakable, each one inspired by the story of one man standing against an empire and winning. For Earth, the Gunslinger's victory was both a triumph and a challenge. The world had been thrust into a galactic spotlight, and with that came the weight of expectation. Governments scrambled to accelerate technological advancements, pooling resources and knowledge in a way humanity had rarely seen. Military leaders devised strategies to adapt Earth's defenses, blending creativity and practicality to counter the Empire's superior firepower. Earth scientists worked tirelessly, reverse engineering the remnants of alien technology left behind after the duel. What they couldn't replicate, they reimagined, using their own ingenuity to create weapons and defenses that bore the distinct mark of human innovation. Earth's efforts weren't just about survival. They were about proving to the galaxy that the Gunslinger's stand was no fluke. As humanity rallied, the Gunslinger himself disappeared. Some claimed to have seen him in the wastelands of Earth, honing his skills for the battles to come. Others believed he had left the planet entirely, walking the stars to spread Earth's defiance to other oppressed worlds. No one knew for certain, and his absence only deepened the mythos surrounding him. Songs were written, stories told, and his image became a universal emblem of resistance. Across the galaxy, people painted his silhouette, hat tilted low, revolver holstered at his side, on walls and banners. The gunslinger was no longer just a man, he had become a movement. His legacy was a reminder that courage and ingenuity could turn the tide, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Within the Empire, the gunslinger's legend had a different effect. Among the ruling elite, there was no denying the damage done to their image of invincibility. The defeat of Zorgar, one of their most feared warlords, had sent shockwaves through the ranks. Worse still, the story of the gunslinger had spread beyond their control, undermining the fear that had been the cornerstone of their dominance. The Empire's leaders were forced to reevaluate their strategies. No longer could they dismiss Earth as a primitive backwater. Humans, they realized, were unpredictable, resourceful, and driven by a resilience that defied logic. They began to see Earth as both a threat and an enigma, a species that defied conventional understanding. Plans for retaliation were drawn, but not without hesitation. The Empire's leadership debated long and hard about how to handle Earth. Some called for overwhelming force, while others cautioned against a second failure. The gunslinger had done more than win a duel. He had instilled fear and uncertainty in a regime that thrived on absolute control. Meanwhile, whispers began to circulate of the gunslinger's continued influence. Stories emerged of mysterious interventions on other worlds, of rebel leaders saved by a lone figure wielding an archaic weapon, of Imperial outposts sabotaged with surgical precision. Whether these accounts were true or merely the result of wishful thinking didn't matter. The idea that the gunslinger was still out there, fighting for the oppressed, was enough to fuel hope across the galaxy. And yet, for all the victories, both real and symbolic, the shadow of the Empire loomed large. They were far from defeated, and their might dwarfed anything humanity, or its newfound allies could muster. The Empire's next move, when it came, would be devastating. But humanity had learned to embrace the uncertainty of the future. The gunslinger's story became a symbol of that defiance. His legend stood as a reminder that Earth's greatest strength was not its technology, or its numbers, but its unyielding spirit. Humanity had been underestimated once, and the consequences had been profound. The galaxy now knew better. As the Empire's fleet gathered in the dark reaches of space, preparing for the inevitable confrontation, one thing was clear: Earth would never again be seen as a weak or insignificant world. The gunslinger had ensured that humanity's name would echo across the stars, a defiant warning to those who sought to dominate them. In the end, the story circled back to its origin, to the moment one man stood alone against the might of an empire, and fired the shot that would change everything. The gunslinger's voice, though never recorded, seemed to linger in the minds of all who heard the tale, a lasting reminder of what humanity was capable of. And as the galaxy braced for the storm ahead, his words were whispered once more, a closing note to a story that was far from over. The Empire sent warlords to break us. We sent one man to remind them why Earth is not to be trifled with.